We're going to talk about developing rhythm this week. I'm going to introduce you to some friends of mine. These are the brothers of Mepkin Abbey. The guy on the tall gentleman on the far left is a friend of mine. His name's Brother Vincent. Um, he and I became friends back in 2006, 2007, and I met him on three different occasions. And then a year ago, after being gone for a decade, I went back to Mepkin Abbey, and he remembered me, um, which I just kind of blew my mind. But this is a picture from 2008, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Trappist traditions. I'm going to mute everybody real quick. We'll have some question and answer here in a bit, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about monastic life and how it pertains to us and kind of developing rhythms of life. I'm fascinated by the way they do life. I'm not aiming at turning us into monks per se, but contemplatives and how we develop rhythms in life that shape who we are. And so we're going to talk about rhythms today. So we're going to first ask the question, what shapes who you are? So first, I'm going to kind of throw a few things out here, and then we're going to give your responses. What is it that actually shapes who you are? Is it your DNA? Your culture, so everything around you, being an American, being a whatever state you're from. Texans really identify with their state, so being a Texan is a big thing. Or is it your beliefs? Do your beliefs shape who you are? Or is it the rituals you engage in, or your desires? So this is the time for you to respond. What is it that shapes who you are? So be sure and unmute yourself and give me some responses. What shapes who you are?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. Thanks, Sherry.
Hey, I was thinking that one of the things that shapes who I am is how I spend my time.
Okay. Tell me more about that.
Um, well, things just go differently when I'm more, scheduled and have, not in a rigid legalistic way, but, to be more intentional, I guess, and make sure and include certain things during the day, such as praying and reading the word and thinking about, how I can, minister to whoever I'm going to see that day. Whereas if I just, get up and, just kind of roam around and do this and that and the other thing, um, things go way differently as far as my focus on God and doing things with Him in mind, as opposed to just taking care of daily tasks like anybody else does.
That's good. Thank you, Sherry. Who else? What shapes who you are? And this doesn't have to be you specifically, but thinking the academic term here is anthropology. What is it that shapes the human being? So Sherry gave us good insight into what shapes her, but this doesn't have to be about you per se, but what shapes people in general?
Things that are passed down through the generations.
So say a little bit more about that.
Um, say your grandmother seasoned a pan this certain way. You don't really know why she does it that way. And you may ask her and say, well, why do you do this first? And she said, well, my mom always did that first. And it's just little nuances that you pick up throughout your life from those who came before you.
Yeah, so I guess I probably should have put on here traditions. That's something. There's an old story about cutting off the end of a ham before you cook it, and it's because it didn't fit in your grandmother's oven, not because it actually has anything to do with cooking the ham. And people go, "Why do you do that?" Anyways, that's there's an old story there. What else shapes who you are? Traditions. That's a good one, Cassie. Thank you. Anybody else? We could vote on these. Which of these shape you more? Your DNA, your beliefs, or your rituals, or cultures or desires?
Oh,
I think your
I
belief.
thought of another one too, like your interactions with other people.
Yeah, your interactions with others, they have an influence on you. Thank you, Anne. Danny, what were you going to say?
It seems like I think your beliefs can override the other ones. It has the power, I think, too.
Okay.
But maybe like, the other ones are more passive, like you would fall back on. And then I think experiences, maybe, I don't know if that's a different category, but the experiences you have in life too.
Yeah. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because experiences, oh man, there's a great quote that it has left me. We had, I think it's T.S. Eliot said, we had the experience, but we missed the meaning, or something like that. Because, how do you engage those experiences matters. Are you passive in the experiences? Or are you active in the experiences? So how do you let the experiences shape you? That's another major part of it.
One of the is, I'm not sure if this is included in one of your categories indirectly, but I guess the personality that God gave us.
Yeah. Personality is a huge thing, because you talked about having kind of a set schedule. I actually need in my life, I need schedule, but I have a huge need for spontaneity in my life with my personality. But whenever I get too chaotic, I need to set more of a schedule. So yeah, I want to kind of, y'all have given some good responses. This is kind of setting the stage for who we are and what we're going to talk about. There's a great book, and that's one of the things in this class that I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional, but I've kind of given y'all bunches of books to look at. But this book called "You Are What You Love" by James K.A. Smith really kind of brought into focus a lot of things I've been feeling about life. And he kind of gets into the thing he really gets into is we kind of treat ourselves like we're a brain on a stick. We really seek to educate people with knowledge, and this is kind of born out of the Enlightenment. And he makes the case in this book that we're not actually a brain on a stick, but we are creatures of desire. That our heart is actually shaped by the things that we love. And so our heart is pointing in a direction. And I would argue, I push back a little bit on Smith. He's got a number of other books that I've been reading that are actually shaping a lot of my thesis, that there is a little bit of balance between what you believe, but also what you do. But I really want to look for a minute at what he kind of gets at is, what does your heart desire? And he tells a story, and there's some movie that he watched that there's a professor and an author going through this like post-apocalyptic place, and at the center of it, they heard that there's a room that will reveal to you your greatest desire. And so there's this scout who is actually guiding them, or he's called the guide or something, and he's guiding them to this room, and they're outside of the room, and he says to the professor and the author, he says, when you enter this room, it'll be revealed to you what your greatest desire is. And he builds up the story in a way that actually creates this tension that you think you know what you desire, but to actually have it revealed to you would be something else. And so you kind of feel this anxiety that they're feeling, that maybe you don't love what you think you love. And he presents it in the book in a way that is setting it up to say, we would all say we love God. Our greatest desire is to be with God. But then he would question, okay, well, what are your habits? What are the things you engage in the most? And he does this in a way that actually looks at a bunch of different things in our culture that actually shape our desires. And so he's presenting our desires as a metric for what our love actually is. And so the habits you engage in are actually more revealing to who you are, rather than simply what you believe. And so we have all these beliefs and convictions, but when people really go to start fighting is when their desires are challenged. Another way to talk about the desires is, what are you most concerned with? What's your image of the good life? And I really recommend that book. This is not a highly academic book. It's written in a way for I think just about anybody to read. He's got more books that have lots of big words that I have to look up when I read it. But it's a good book to kind of challenge how we actually go about doing life. And I want to kind of talk about that a little bit. What does it take to create a new habit? So I'm gonna kind of scroll through this a little bit. What does it take to create a new habit? It actually takes about 2 months on average, depending on the person. It can take anywhere from 18 days to 254 days to create a new habit in your life. You have to be intentional about it and continually engaging in it. And if you forget it for a couple of days, you kind of have to take a few steps back and go at it again. And the other part of habits is 50% of life is lived out of habits, not out of decisions. This is where I go back to back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. The bracelet that everybody was wearing was the WWJD bracelet, the What Would Jesus Do bracelet. And if you don't ever actually stop and say, okay, well, what would Jesus do in this situation? You just act. And you act out of the habits that you formed. So how do you form habits of compassion? Because if your natural reaction isn't compassion, then you need to form a habit of compassion. So how do you form those kind of habits? So the flip side of this is, what does it take to create a bad habit? I'm going to let y'all respond to this a little bit. What does it take to create a bad habit? So if it takes 2 months on average to create a good habit or a new habit, what does it take to create a bad habit? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I think bad habits are created pretty quickly.
Yeah, but how are they created so quickly?
I feel
It's
like
like
you
our,
don't even
yeah,
you don't recognize that you're falling into that habit.
Hmm.
It just becomes second nature.
Yeah.
Or you like them better.
Bad habits are often easier. It's yeah, you just like it. Rage is actually a much easier reaction than love. Rage is simple. Love actually takes a lot of work. Anybody else? What does it take to create a bad habit?
An excuse. Sometimes, like, you can justify something and then you keep justifying it with your excuse, and then you're just like, oh well.
Yeah, that's a good one. I ran across a quote today. I'm trying to remember what it is. I don't even remember. It's on my Facebook. If someone wants to go look at it. I don't remember half the things I say. But yeah, you justify you justify your actions. Actually, if someone who's a friend of mine on Facebook, if y'all go look at what I posted today and tell me, I can't look. I took Facebook off my phone, so I'd quit being distracted. But yeah, you justify. We like our bad habits, so we justify them because it's really what our heart actually desires.
You want to know what you said?
Yeah.
What the heart loves, the will chooses, and the mind justifies.
Yes. What the heart loves, the will chooses, and what's the last part? The mind justifies.
Mind justifies.
Yeah. So we often we think that our beliefs are actually what drive us, and in a lot of ways they do. I don't want to completely neglect the beliefs, but a lot of the times what our heart desires, we will actually end up justifying with our minds. And so we end up saying stuff like, Jesus said, turn the other cheek, but you don't need to be a pushover. And it's like, wait, no, Jesus just said, turn the other cheek. Or, Jesus says, love your enemies. Well, not those enemies. He's talking about the people down the street from you, but not the ones on the other side of the world. And you start going, oh man, okay, so it's, again, we got to engage the heart. And so what does it take to create a bad habit? I have a very short list here. Neglect. If you don't engage in intentional habits, you will form bad habits. By simply neglecting to develop good habits, you will form bad habits. Okay, we'll say a lot more about that. So let's bring some scripture into this. Paul talks about it. 1 Corinthians 9:24-27 says, Don't you know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. Okay, in light of what we've been talking about, tell me what Paul's saying here. Not everybody at once. We have these long pauses, and then everybody jumps in at the same time.
You have to be extremely intentional. Just really intentional.
Yeah, you got to be intentional. It's good. What else are you hearing in this?
I hear you have to keep your end goal in mind.
You have to keep your end goal in mind. Sorry, I'm trying to find. Oh, my in-laws. Y'all figured out how to unmute. Sorry.
Yeah.
I just saw your text. Yeah, you got to have your end goal in mind.
And it's not just you jump into it and go. You have to have that training and preparation and mindset.
Yeah, you got to, it's about your mindset. It's about your training, preparation. Dion, did you have something you were going to share or tag? Cool. So we see Paul is really aiming at this, that it's not a passive thing. It's something you have to engage in. You have to be diligent in how you engage in these practices. So I'm gonna look at an example here. Michael Phelps, the greatest Olympian to ever live. He trained for 25 to 30 hours a week to be an Olympian. So that's not just swimming. He didn't just swim to be a great Olympian. His whole life was practice. And really what we're talking about is practice. He engaged in practice of eating. He ate certain things so that his body would perform a certain way. It's really hard to be an Olympic swimmer if you're eating cheeseburgers every day. Not that cheeseburgers are bad, but you're going to be really sluggish if you're eating a cheeseburger and then you go swim a race. He engaged in sleeping practice. He was diligent with how much sleep he got. I think he even slept in like a chamber that was like a high altitude chamber or something, so that his blood would have to work harder to get more oxygen. So he could. It's crazy, this stuff that he did. But breathing practice. He practiced his breath. He transformed his body into an Olympic machine. And so when you look at like an Olympian and you say, okay, how do you become an Olympian? Well, you got to be dedicated. You can't just halfway go at it. You have to transform every part of your life. It's the Olympic sprinters. They have a coach for how they step out of the blocks. So they have a coach that is dedicated to the first step that they take out of the blocks, and even how they pump their arms. They have coaches that are dedicated to the minute details to shave seconds off their time. And so they're diligent to become the best athletes they can be, so that they can be transformed. Also, this is the best picture I could find of Michael Phelps, because all the other ones he's wearing very little clothing. So we went with this one. I didn't want to tempt anyone. So, but moving on, when we talk about habits, the church word for this is liturgies. We don't use liturgy in our tradition too much, but it's a word that I think we need to think more about. I'm going to talk a little bit about broadly what we do in the church, but I want this to kind of apply specifically to what we do as individuals. And the way that Smith defines liturgy is liturgies are rituals of ultimate concern, rituals that are formative for identity, that inculcate particular visions of the good life, and do so in a way that means to trump other ritual formations. And so what he's getting at in his book is he talks about what are the rituals that we develop in our church tradition that actually counteract and work against the rituals of the world. He's got some great examples in his book on like the rituals of the shopping mall. In his other book, Desiring the Kingdom, he actually does this imaginative exercise that you're a Martian coming to the planet, not just America, but just the world. And he talks about these great cathedrals with seas of parking, and you walk in, and he kind of goes through the shopping mall and talks about how the mall is designed to shape your desires in a certain way. And talks about, he uses very religious language to talk about the shopping mall, because to kind of talk about something that's ordinary in an unordinary way to get you to think about it differently. It's really good. And he does that a lot in this book as well. You Are What You Love. That we do this with universities, we do this with sports. And there's a lot of ways we talk about this, that we are presenting a vision of the good life by the practices that we engage in. Marketing does this in a really good way. If you think about marketing, marketing doesn't give you facts. What does marketing actually give you? When you think about how marketing shapes your desires, what does marketing do really well?
It lies to
It
you.
takes things that you love.
It lies to you.
Yes.
What was the other thing? Sorry.
It takes things that you love to then influence you to purchase things that go along with that.
And actually, it doesn't even take things you love. It gives you things to love.
Mhm.
I mean, the whole point of marketing is to convince you that you need something that you never needed in the first place. And we do this. I didn't actually intend to go in this direction, but we're all adults here. Sex sells, and marketing uses sex in a way because sex, it gets to your ultimate desire. Um, and sexuality is this ultimate desire that everything is marketed in that way. I think there's like Minute Rice that was marketed that way, that like all the time you would save. Anyways, I don't want to get into all that. That's part of some research I'm doing that's really fascinating. But yeah, they actually grab your desires and they present to you a picture of the good life, that if only you had that thing, then you'd have the good life. And so churches, what we spend most of our time doing is giving people information, and we try to teach people things. And that's not bad. But what are we doing to actually develop rituals so that we actually shape people and form their identities through the things they do? So I'm going to keep talking about this. He says that Christian worship is the imagination station, which recalibrates our hearts towards God, whom we are made to love. Meeting with the body of Christ, we practice habits which immerse us in God's storyline of the world and invite us to make that narrative our own. And so, how do we engage in Christian practices in a way that actually shape communities? And this is where my dissertation is actually on the Lord's Supper as one of these rituals that we engage in regularly that should shape our identity. But when we do the Lord's Supper, we often do it as quickly as possible to get on to the real event of worship, which is the sermon. And I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but if you think about how much time we spend around communion and how much time we spend listening to sermons, it kind of shows a little bit about or how we think about this. So he really presents, how do we shape our desires through rituals? And so that's talking about the church context. I want to talk more about our individual lives, and really these things kind of go hand in hand. So coming back to my friends at Mepkin Abbey, they are Trappist monks, and this is their schedule. This is their daily schedule. It changes a little bit on Sunday, but this is the basic schedule. Their day starts at 3 a.m., which is a lot easier when you don't watch the sitcoms and you go to bed at 8. So, their day starts with prayer at 3:20 till 4. And then after that, that's their prayer together. Then after that, they go into Lectio Divina for the next 2 hours. Individually, they spend time with God. They come back for what's called morning lauds at 6:30. And then they have mass at 7:30, which is basically right after that. And then midday prayer, and then vespers at 6 p.m. and then compline, which is evening prayer at 7:35. From 8 p.m. until 8 a.m. Is what's called golden silence. So they don't speak during that time because they're spending time with God during that time. This is not practical for your life, I'm assuming. But some things that I've learned from their way of life that I think is really important for today is, they have a time in the afternoon. You see about 6 hours between midday prayer and vespers where they go and work. They're out in the field, hoeing the field. They're out, cutting trees. This particular monastery does a lot with mushrooms, not taking them, but growing them. One of the things I've learned from them that I think would be incredibly beneficial for the American life is when you're plowing the field and you're halfway through a row and it's time to go pray, what do? You stop hoeing, you stop plowing the field, and you go and pray. And that kills your compulsion for productivity. Our culture really values productivity, and that makes prayer central to who you are rather than how do we be as productive today. It also probably makes you more productive during that time because you know it's going to end when it ends. So I'm presenting this as kind of a guide to say, okay, what do we learn from this? But what would this kind of rhythm look like in your life? So here's some homework for you to try. Think about your day. Don't start at 3 a.m. unless that's when you already get up. But think about your day and think of 3 to 7 natural breaks in your day where you could just simply add in 90 seconds of prayer. If you're thinking about like 7 times a day that you pray for 90 seconds, how would the next hour of your day be if you spent 90 seconds praying over that hour? Think about the rhythm of your day, and if you just laced prayer all throughout the day, and it may be the different practices that you've been engaging in through the series of classes, but what would it look like? And sometimes it may be, okay, I've got to meet with this person and they drive me nuts. And you just simply pray, Lord, help me to see you, or help me to see them as you see them. How would that change your interactions with them if you engaged in prayer throughout your day? How would that shape the way you work? Say, okay, God, I've got to go back to work. I don't want to be productive, but Lord, I'm supposed to do everything for your glory. So Lord, help me to do things for your glory today. And just kind of look at what does prayer look like in rhythm through your day. So that's your homework. I would love to hear back from you since we're not meeting next week. Shoot me an email or call me, text me, whatever, and say, do this for a week and just see how your week is different and don't take on a huge load. If 7 seems like a lot, do it 3 times a day, morning, noon, and evening. And just, this is something you can do in your car as soon as you get home. Lord, help me to be present to my family whenever I walk in the door. How's that going to change your time and your interactions? Oh man, I'm looking at the time. Let me rush through this real quick. Over the last few years, I've become more and more fascinated by the liturgical calendar. This is the Christians all over the world follow this calendar, not just the Catholic Church. Our tradition doesn't follow this, but I want to make a case for why maybe we should. I'm going to give a quick overview of what the calendar is. Advent starts in December. So the Christian year actually starts at the beginning of December with Advent. This is a time of anticipation for Christ's coming. So think about how this would shape your life if this was a rhythm of your year, that you spend a month anticipating Christ coming. And then for the time of Christmas, not just the day, but Christmas is a season. Christmas is a celebration that Christ has come. And then you go into what's called the Epiphany, that Christ has now been revealed to the world. And so you're reading the stories of the shepherds in Luke where Christ has been revealed to them, or the 3 wise men that Christ has revealed to them. And you're spending time focusing on what does it mean for Christ to be revealed to the world because Christ has come. And then that leads into the time of Lent, which is the beginning of Christ's of Jesus's ministry, but it's a time of preparation that he goes into the wilderness as a preparation for then going to the cross. And Lent ends with what's called Holy Week, where you look at the last week of Jesus' life and him going to the cross. And all of this is building up to the climax of the year, which is resurrection at Easter. And Easter is not just one day. Easter is a season where you celebrate that all of the world has been made right through the resurrection. All the world is being put to right because Christ has resurrected from the dead. And so you celebrate that for a season, which then goes into the season of the Ascension, the season of Pentecost, which is the coming of the Holy Spirit and the launching of the church to go transform the world. So that's the first half of the year, which then launches you into what's called ordinary time, which is when you look at the story of God's people. So all of the first half of the year is spent focusing on the coming of Christ and Christ's life. So that the second half of the year is focused on the story of God's people and how we continue to bring Christ into the world, and we live out life in the Holy Spirit to be Christ in the world. And so this rhythm of the Christian calendar shapes us in beautiful ways, to where as you engage in this every year, if you're actually intentional with it, it creates a longing for Christ's redemption of the world. But instead, we follow the American calendar, and a lot of the times in the church, we actually follow the American calendar. We do sermon series based on American holidays, and how does that shape the desires of our heart? And so we focus on New Year's, and these things aren't bad, but how does it shape our churches, and how does it shape us as individuals? And so just real quick, Super Bowl Sunday, Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, you think it's an Irish holiday, but it's really an American holiday for people to just get trashed, followed by another American holiday for people to get trashed on Cinco de Mayo. And then you've got Mother's Day, Memorial Day, Father's Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, Veterans Day, Halloween, Thanksgiving, and we end the year with Christmas. But if you think about all these things from the American consumeristic mindset, I grew up that Christmas was a holiday of gift giving. Our church never talked about Jesus. And actually, I remember a time when an elder got up to read a letter of why there's no Christmas trees in the church, and I think, that's okay for churches to do that, but we have to think about the implications of what we do celebrate and what we don't celebrate. So again, these things aren't bad, but think about how these holidays shape the American identity. How do we engage in the Christian identity? And so, again, Christianity is filled with rhythm. And so I would love to have more time to talk about this, but I want to keep moving a little bit. So I would love to hear some of your feedback on that at the end. And how do you engage in these holidays? And think about your family, think about children, and how, like, if you started in early age, how do you shape the identity of your children through the Christian calendar? And I'm not saying throw out the American calendar, but which one do we lift up as more important? Okay, so here's the last thing I want to do: creating a rule of life. And this is a very simplified version of a rule of life. But think about who you need to be. Think about things that need to change in your life, and create rhythms. Create what would be practices, or a rule for your life to be transformed more into Christ's image. And so some questions to kind of wrestle with is, what is a word that you need to focus on? So for me this year, one of my rules is contentment. I'm really focusing on the word contentment because I found myself getting on Amazon too often, ordering something I didn't need, and then forgetting that I even ordered it. And so when there's a box on the front porch, it was like Christmas because I had no idea what it was. And I realized I was just fulfilling a desire to have things. And so my word for the year is contentment. And I've got, Philippians 4:11 written up on my mirror to remind myself that I don't need stuff. And it's where Paul talks about, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I don't need, I've had plenty and I've been in want, but it's Christ who sustains me. And so my word this year is content. What does it mean to be content? So what's a word that you need to focus on this year? Write it on your mirror. paste it in your car somewhere, whatever it is. And maybe it's grace. Maybe you've been really hard on yourself and you're really picturing God as this tyrant who's just ready to zap you at any moment. And so maybe the word's grace that you need to focus on, and giving yourself grace, allowing yourself to rest in God's grace. Maybe it's love, maybe it's discipline, maybe it's beating your body, whatever it is. But find a word that you need to focus on and have it in front of you on a regular basis. What are the habits that you need to develop? So we've kind of done a buffet of different spiritual practices. What's one or two of these spiritual practices that you really want to develop in your life? Maybe it's just starting the day off with breathing. We breathe all the time, but be intentional with your breathing and allowing God to just be on your breath. When and where do you connect with God? And so thinking about, when do you most naturally connect with God, and utilizing that time for your time with God. So if you naturally are more contemplative in the morning, you're able to kind of focus on your relationship with God in the morning. Carve out space in the morning and make that a time that you actually spend time with God. I don't recommend trying to create space when it's already hard to do it. Find the easy places to do this and then work from there. And once you do it in those spaces, it'll be easier to do that in the harder spaces. When do you feel most distant from God? That's another one to look at. That how do you engage in practices that are helpful when you feel most distant from God? And so, creating a rule of life. It could even be, okay, you may recognize that you're just not a compassionate person. And so you need to engage in times of compassion where you can, or maybe there's a person you're not compassionate with. And so you need to develop some rules for life on, okay, I speak way too much when I'm with this person. I need to let them speak first. And you actually create a rule. Say, okay, I'm not going to tell them about my day until I first heard about their day. This is something that I don't think I've told Erin this, but I realize after she's been in the car, or she's been at work all day, she'll get in the car and I'll just start telling her about my day. And I've recognized that's actually not good for her. She needs a little bit of space for quiet. And so I've tried to create a little bit of a rule in my life where if I pick her up from work, I ask her how her day was, and then I just be quiet. Whereas I may not have spent time with anybody all day and I'm ready to just unleash everything because I'm a talker. That wears her out. And so the compassionate, the person being a person of compassion and a person who's present means that maybe I need to develop a rule of listening first. And so think about areas of your life. And if you need help developing these rules, I would love to dialogue with you during this. And if you create a rule, and you would like me to look at it, I would love to spend some time looking at that.